Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. Yay, another week. Yay, one of the books, another weekend is coming into view. I'm going to begin by returning some assignments, or some assignments. Let's take a minute. I must say, this was one of the better assignments that I graded. Several of you, the part writing was really, really good. I have to commend you. I was like, wow, you get it. So good job. I mean, if you can keep that kind of part writing, that level, that quality of part writing up, you'll do just fine whenever it comes to any part writing assignment. So. Yeah, please keep that up. That's really good. I was happy to see that. Good. Okay, let's see what. Yeah, I looked at your analysis and your reaction. Yeah, 2 points for Okay, so I've got your homework returned to you. What I'd like to do now is I'd like you to take out, if you haven't already, the handout that you had for today, basically on writing, modulating progression, writing the Roman numerals for a progression that modulates with a pivot chord and a progression that modulates chromatically. And again, we had talked about this last class, and on the handout, on the assignment, I just listed all the steps that you need to take in order for each one of those. And before I ask for questions, let me point out a few things that I think everyone in here should have on their handout. First of all, the pivot chord in section A should be, I hope when you did a pivot chord chart, you found this was your smoothest pivot chord. A 6 in F becomes a 4 in E minor. If you didn't use that pivot chord, then you either did the pivot chord chart wrong, or you just simply circled or didn't see that one as the best or the smoothest in your pivot chord chart. Always be careful too. I'll take this opportunity to remind you, if the chord in the old key, if it's minor, then the chord in the new key must also be minor because it's one and the same chord. If the chord is in root position here, it must be root position here. The bass position must be the same again because it's just one and the same chord. So be careful about that. But that's the smoothest pivot chord I was looking for in the first section. The chromaticism in section B should be, if you did follow the instructions correctly, it should be the pitches G, G sharp, and A. And these three notes should be circled in your music. I'm not kidding. This was not at this school, but there was a year where I was teaching in Florida, and there was a student, and The instructions would always say for chromatic modulation, it would say, be sure that you circle the chromaticism in the music. And so the student would go up to the instructions and he'd circle the word chromaticism. I'm not kidding, I'm not joking, you know, this is true. So he said circle the chromaticism, and he just literally took that and circled the word instead of putting the pitches in the music. And I was like, wow, this happened multiple times, and I was like, whoa. I don't know how to be more clear in the instructions, but that's what the student did. So, and maybe you're not surprised. I don't know. I was surprised. Okay, so this should be the chromaticism, and in the music, the notes should be circled on the staff. The new keys should be clearly labeled. So in the first section, did you at least label the new key of A minor at the point of pivot, at the pivot chord? Because that would definitely be a point there. And then also, when you did the chromaticism in part B, you should have something like this. And then the new key shown somewhere around here. And again, I don't know what chord you use. I tend to like to use 5/6 or 5/6/5 because I think, yeah, I asked you to put this in the bass place. So 5/6 or 5/6/5 going to a 1, that would be the easiest way to harmonize two of those chromatic pitches. And let's see, I mentioned this last class as well. Only authentic cadences shall be permitted at the end of your progression. So no half cadences at the end of either section A or B. I want you to end on a tonic so that you can confirm and strongly establish the new key. A half cadence wouldn't do that very strongly. But you got to end on 1. Preferably root position 1, but 1 is the most important thing there. Okay, now, does anyone have any questions about something on this assignment? Yes? Oh yeah, the second part you could change your progression. You're still modulating between the same two keys, but you could choose different chords. Yes. Yeah, they didn't have to be identical or the same progression. Also, I would say, just to be on the safe side, it'd be probably good to have at least a minimum of 4 chords in the old key before the pivot, that is, and about a minimum of 4 chords after the pivot in section A. If you have more than 4 chords before the pivot and after, that's wonderful. But I would say 4 is probably a good number. And then the same thing with part B in the chromatic progression. If you can have about 4 chords before the chromaticism in the old key and about 4 chords after the chromaticism in the new key. And you know, even this one might not be that, I might not be that strict on, because if you use 5/6 to 1 here, you're already establishing the new key, and you may just need a couple more. You may just need a couple more. But this one, I think you definitely need at least 4 chords, because you're coming out of a predominant, and you need to get some kind of dominant and tonic there to establish the key. Okay. Good. Are there other questions about anything on this handout?
So I'm just curious why from like step 6 you said the first to 2,000. Why did we have 5,000?
Oh, what that means is it's telling you to approach T with the diatonic version of this chromatic pitch. It's not talking about chord build.
Oh, so I've heard that something?
Well, yeah, you mean to harmonize this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, you could have theoretically, but again, it would probably resolve irregularly, especially if you have to go to something else in a different key. So I might not choose to harmonize this note with a secondary chord, just because it's not very practical. But what the instructions were saying is once you find your chromatic, your T, your chromatic pitch, then precede it with the diatonic version of that pitch. That means the same pitch lettering, just without the accidental. So that's what that instruction is specifically telling you to do. Not necessarily a chord, but the actual pitch. So you get your 3-note chromaticism. Yeah, good. So that's a good question. Good. Other questions for clarification? Did you by any chance, I mean, I don't know, you were able to get to a keyboard or anything, did you by any chance play your progression that you wrote at the piano to see how it sounds? Oh man, that's the best part. Or if you don't have a keyboard, do you have like a guitar or something to jam out and, play your progression? Well, I know a lot of you have guitars. You're taking classical guitar. Oh, yes. Or maybe you can bring it to your class and have your professor on the guitar. But that's, to me, that's kind of like a little reward. It's the best part. You actually get to hear what you created. And, well, I would assume it would sound pretty smooth, at least the modulation, because you've taken a lot of care to make sure that you've done the modulation very subtly in both cases.
So I do have a question on the first one.
Uh-huh.
So I didn't use 6 in F major.
Oh, you did?
No, I did, but not as like a predominant. I used it right after 5 for a concepted.
Oh, yeah, okay. So in other words, is like the chord right before this one, did you use a 5?
Yes, I used the 5 second.
Yeah, that's actually, I think I used a 5 as well at that same spot. That's kind of clever, because you're just using a deceptive progression.
Yeah.
So it's not functioning as a predominant here, but it still is a predominant in the new key. So I still think that'll be really good. That'll be smooth. Yeah, I think that's clever. Good. Yeah, you can get kind of creative with some of these things, depending on your taste, depending on what you like to hear, the sound you're going for, that kind of thing. All right. In lieu, or in place of collecting this assignment today, I want to give you a short quiz here in class that just asks you to analyze one pivot chord modulation and one chromatic modulation. Okay? So, if all you need to have for this quiz is a pencil, and they're just really short examples of progressions, and I can even play these for you at the piano so you can hear where the modulations are. And I'm just asking you to do a little bit of analysis to tell me which one modulates by pivot chord and which one modulates by chromatic motion. As you read the instructions, notice that you only have to analyze the chords underneath the bracket. In each example, you don't have to analyze every chord. And underneath the bracket in each example is a modulation. Play the first example for you. You can see it says there it starts in G. play the second passage now, which also starts in G major. Try to finish up in one more minute. So today we are starting a new topic, and this topic, which is called sequences, will last us until the test review and the next test. So this is kind of a big topic. It's one of my favorite topics to teach, just because I really like the sound of sequences. In music, sequences can actually be some of the most pleasant sounding passages in all of music. At least that's my opinion. We'll see what you think by the time we get done with the several classes covering this topic. Okay, first of all, you need to know that a sequence, and by the way, this is the word sequence. It's not, I didn't even know this word until several years ago. But what is it that, and ladies, maybe you can help me out. What is it that sometimes you have on dresses that's called sequins? Yeah, that's spelled a little bit differently. Okay. I'm not sure exactly what all that is, but we're talking about a sequence here. Okay? A sequence is a repetition of a musical pattern at a different pitch level. We can probably put that in here because it's not that long of a definition. A repetition of a musical pattern at a different pitch level. Sequences in music can be melodic. That is, many sequences in music only involve one voice. And here's a very short example of a sequence in the last measure on the board up here. If I start with an initial pattern that goes do, re, mi, do, then if I repeat that same pattern just at a different pitch level each time, those repetitions are called sequences. So, re, mi, fa, sol, mi. So we say that there's a musical pattern, an original one that's established, and then when that pattern is repeated at different pitch levels, we call those repetitions sequences. Sequences of the original. But sequences in music can also be harmonic, meaning that the sequence can involve all of the voices in musical texture, not just one voice. In a melodic sequence, as you see right here, the musical pattern is repeated at a different pitch level in the same voice, because you only have one voice for a melodic sequence. And by the way, generally speaking, in a sequence, once an interval and a direction is chosen for the repetitions, the same general interval and direction are used to generate the pitch levels for further sequences. What that means is, you see how this pattern here starts a whole step above this one, C compared to D, and this pattern starts a step above this one. So generally speaking, when you start a sequence, if you're going to go up, the sequence will continue to go up until it ends. It doesn't go up and then down and then up. It doesn't change direction. Sequences don't generally do that. Also, if you decide that the first repetition or the pattern is a step higher than the original, then the next one should be approximately a step higher than that one, and the next one in the sequence a step higher, and so on and so forth. So once a direction is chosen, whether up or down, that's usually maintained throughout the sequence. And then once an interval or distance between the first pattern and the sequences, once that is selected, usually that is used and repeated for each successive repetition or successive sequence. Okay? Now, as I said, in a harmonic sequence, all of the voices of the texture are involved. They're all sequenced. And when you involve all the voices of a texture, when you sequence them all, what happens is, as a result, you get a two-chord pattern that is repeated at different pitch levels. So let's take a look at this formula or example I have over here. This is an example of a harmonic sequence. Let's just take a look at the sequencing happening in all the voices. Look at the soprano voice. Do, la, ti, sol, la, fa, how this pattern, if we call these first two notes a pattern, do you see how the pattern is repeated in the soprano but at a different pitch level each time? So this one starts on do, blah, blah. This one starts a step lower, blah, blah. Step lower, blah, 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 blah. So we can say that all of these measures here, since they're repetitions of the original at a different pitch level, these are sequences of the original. Let's verify that the alto voice is also being sequenced. Okay, here's the alto's pattern. Mi, do, and then it's repeated at a different pitch level. Re, ti, do, la, ti, sol. All that. And then can we verify that the tenor voice is being sequenced as well? So we have, here's the tenor's pattern. Sol, fa, and then that's repeated a step lower. Fa, mi, and then a step lower. Mi, re, and then finally re, do. And let's verify now that the bass is sequential as well. So here's the bass's pattern. Do, fa, and then it's repeated a step lower. Ti, mi, la, re, sol, do. Can you see over the stand? I hope it's not in your way. All right, so the point is, in a harmonic sequence, all the voices are sequential. And because all the voices are doing their own melodic sequence, what that results in is it results in a two-chord pattern. The entire chord, that pattern is sequenced in the next measure, and the next measure, and the next measure, because all the voices are participating. All the voices are being sequenced. So when that happens again, the entire harmony, the chords are being sequenced, and generally what we get then is an initial two-chord pattern like I have boxed here, that is then repeated at different pitch levels. And by the way, sequences, you can repeat, you can sequence over and over and over again until you just don't want to do it anymore. Like you could, there's no limit. You could sequence like 500 times if you wanted to, although that would be ridiculous. Usually what composers will do is they'll establish a pattern or a model, the original, and then they'll sequence it no more than 3 times. Some composers will just sequence it twice and then that will be enough, and then they'll go on. They'll break out of the sequence and they'll go on to some other music. Okay? All right. So now I have, a handout on harmonic sequences for you. So let's do that first before I lose any more time. Take one of these. Time I get to forget to play things. Rather than you have me singing each of those line sequences, maybe you want to hear how it sounds all together. You can get a bigger concept, broader concept on what a harmonic sequence is. So that thing on the board altogether sounds like this. By the way, harmonic sequences are generally what we call very goal-oriented. In other words, once you hear the pattern and maybe one repetition, your mind gets the idea of where it's headed. You kind of know where it's going to go, where it's going to land, where it's going to finish. It's kind of what sequences are like. All right, so on this handout that I gave you, this is a handout called Harmonic Sequences. And we're going to look at, there are 4 harmonic sequence types that involve root movement of chords by fifth. We call these fifth sequences because the roots move by that interval. Can I have a volunteer read out loud the top paragraph? All right, please.
The harmonic sequence is a passage based on a repeated harmonic pattern or a repeated interval time. In this typical sequence, the first 2 chords establish
catch all that one, Hannah, right? Here we go. There we go. All right, so let's take a look at the top left sequence on your handout. It's called the descending fifth sequence. The reason it's called that is because the base goes down by fifth. You can see, let's look at the bottom here. The base goes down by fifth or up by fourth. You know that the perfect fourth is the inversion of the perfect fifth. Okay? So really you could think of, starting on C, you could think of every single successive note of fifth lower. But if you kept doing that, you'd go so far below the staff, you'd have to have 20 million ledger lines. So in order to keep the notes in the staff, going down by fifth is the same as going up by fourth. You'll get the same note each time you do that in the sequence, okay? So for instance, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you see C down in fifth gets you F, and F down in fifth will get you B, and B down in fifth will get you E, and so you're already below the staff. So we just alternate by descending fifths with ascending fourth. It's the same thing. You still get the same notes: C, F, B, E, A, D, etc., etc. All right. So let me play this example for you at the piano, so you can hear what the descending fifth sequence sounds like. And you'll be able to notice that every single voice, the soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, they are all doing their own individual melodic sequence, so that the entire chord is being progression is being sequenced. You probably heard of progressions like that. So I won't belabor this too much, but do you see how the soprano note voice is sequential? It goes mi, fa, and then it's down a step in the next measure. Re, mi, and then down a step, do, re, etc. And can you see how the alto voice is sequential? It goes do, do, that's its original pattern. I'm not saying anything personal about altos, by the way. So do, do, and then there's ti, it's down a step, and then la, la, and so on and so forth. And then the tenor voice, even though it's written up here in the treble clef, it is also sequential. It goes sol, la, then down a step, fa, sol, then down a step, mi, fa, and so on and so forth. So that makes the first two chords, it makes that little two-chord progression, it makes it a pattern, and that whole pattern can be sequenced. So this in the dash box here, we have the next two chords. They're a step lower than the ones in the solid box, and then the two chords after that are a step lower than the ones in the dash box, etc., etc. You see kind of all that that's happening there? It's following a pattern, basically. Okay. Now, because the chords in harmonic sequences are formed by each voice undergoing their own melodic sequence, composers are not overly concerned about the particular functions and progressions of the chords within a harmonic sequence. We heard a few moments ago on Hannah read in the top paragraph that sequences are a focus or concentration on linear motion. That means composers are really focused on the lines moving this way, horizontally. They're not so preoccupied with the vertical, the harmonic sounds, even though they're chords as they're making them. But because they're focused more on the individual lines being sequential and staying sequential, look at the types of chords you get here. 1, 4, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. They're not really concerned what type of progression they're making. The progression just comes out as a byproduct or result of all the sequential voices. Okay? Now, it just so happens that in this one, the descending fifth sequence, it's the same thing as what I've called or told you before, is a circle of fifth progression. It's the same thing. C, F, B, E, A, D, and then the next two chords of B, G, C. The roots fall by fifth. That's another name for a circle progression. So that's exactly what happens in a descending fifth sequence. Oh, and by the way, I should say, with all these various types of, there are many types of harmonic sequences, but the way that you can isolate them and identify them and be very specific and know them is because the baseline is unique to each of these types of sequences. The baseline is singular, it's unique. So if we can look at the baseline pattern in all of these harmonic sequences we're going to learn, and if we can memorize and learn how that bass moves, which is what's in this box down here, this rectangle, then you're going to be able to identify sequences in real music, in actual music, because you'll be able to look at the baseline pattern and know, oh, that was the descending fifth baseline pattern that I learned. Okay? So really, it's going to be, even though there's many different types of sequences, all are distinguishable from one another by their unique baselines. And so the way to learn the various harmonic sequences is to memorize their baseline. And so for the descending fifth sequence, I'll eventually need you to know that the bass goes down by fifth, up by fourth, down by fifth, up by fourth, down by, etc., etc. So that's why it's put there in bold in a box underneath there. Now, let's take a look at another one here, the one to the right. It's called an ascending fifth sequence. And if you just look at the chord progression, you see the Roman numerals. You see how composers aren't concerned again about tonic going to predominant, going to dominant, they're not concerned about acceptable or well-formed progressions. Because look what happens in this one. A 5 goes to a 2. What? But guess what? In the context or within harmonic sequences, that is allowed perfectly. Because the main point, the main thing that's happening there is all the voices are doing their own melodic sequence, which is creating a chordal sequence, a harmonic sequence. And we're not concerned about what chords come after what and what chords come before what. Whatever happens, happens as a result of these sequential patterns in the voices. So the ascending fifth sequence is actually the reverse of the descending fifth. You'll notice that the chords in the solid box or rectangle here are repeated. They're actually a step higher than in the dash box. And then the next two chords in the next bar are actually a step higher than the ones in the dotted box, and so on and so forth. And what is the unique baseline motion or baseline pattern that will help us determine and identify this sequence from henceforth? What does it say there? The bass goes up by fifth or down by fourth. It's just the reverse of the descending fifth sequence on the other side of the page. Up by fifth, down by fourth. Now let me play this one. This one's going to sound a little bit, it could sound a little bit irregular to you, but it is a harmonic sequence, so composers allowed it. And we have this. Let's go down to the bottom left now of your Can I have some volunteer read the little paragraph that's underneath the variation on root movement? Please.
Sequences that move by fifth can vary by certain chords that are normally in root position. As in the basic sequences, the pattern established by first two chords is repeated in all voices until the point at which the sequence ends. Below asterisks and chords, whose inversion is changed.
Okay, thank you very much. What this is basically saying is that if we take some of the chords up in the descending fifth sequence in the top left, and we place some of those chords in inversion, like first inversion, it doesn't alter or change the sequence really in any way. It's still a descending fifth sequence because the roots of the chords are still moving by descending fifth. Okay, the roots might not be in the lowest voice or in the bass, but they're still moving by descending fifth. Okay? So on the surface, changing the inversion of some of these chords in the harmonic sequence appears to create an entirely new sequence because the sequence's baseline changes. But because, as I said, the roots of the chords and the overall progression of the harmonic sequence do not change when the chords are inverted, it is appropriate to call this quote-unquote new sequence simply a variant of the original rather than an entirely different sequence. So you see why this one is called a descending fifth sequence variant. It doesn't have its own name like Fred or Theodosius or something brand new. Okay? It's a spin-off of the descending fifth sequence. It's got the same chord progression, 1, 4, 7, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, except that every other chord is in first inversion. That's the only difference. That's the only difference. You see that? So in the descending fifth variant sequence, for example, every other chord is in first inversion from the descending fifth sequence. And what is the baseline that results when you place every other chord from the original one in first inversion? The bass moves how? Down by third, up by second, down by third, up by second, down by third, up by second. So you'll need to remember that this bass motion, down a third, up a second, and associate that with the descending fifth variant sequence. Not the original descending fifth, the descending fifth variant sequence. And I want to play this at the piano quickly. See that on the screen. This one sounds pretty normal, and the bass doesn't leap around as much, it's a lot smoother. The sound we get is this. By the way, you can use some seventh chords in this sequence to spice it up. It makes it sound really nice, like this. I like the sound of that one. Added sevenths in. Okay, finally, the last one on the bottom right is called the ascending fifth variant sequence. It's the same chord progression as the ascending fifth one immediately up above, but again, every other chord is placed in first inversion. But the chord progression, 1, 5, 2, 6, 3, 7, all that, that's all in the same order. So, what happens when we place every other chord from the ascending fifth sequence in first inversion? We get the variant. What is the baseline pattern for the ascending fifth variant? Down by second, up by third. So do you see how there's 4 slightly but related harmonic sequences on this page? And between now and next class, and part of the homework, I'm going to want you to get familiar with the specific baseline pattern. Start to associate, ascending fifth variant, that's down 2, up 3, down 2, up 3, right? And the descending fifth variant is down 3, up 2, down 3, that kind of thing. Okay. Where are my notes? Okay, so we don't have, next class what we're going to do is we're going to look at some actual real music examples that use some of these sequences. In fact, there's some on the back of your handout that we'll be able to get to next week. Just on the very back of that, and we'll listen to some of those, and you'll see how cool these sequences, they really sound in real music. Because composers use them to their, they really exploit them and use them to the best of their ability. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to leave you with a handout for your homework assignment for Monday. And really this assignment is, I consider this a pretty easy, kind of a freebie, almost a gimme. All you have to do is list the baseline pattern for each of the 4 sequences on this sheet. It's just that I've changed them to different keys. And then you can write down the Roman numerals for those 2, and it just comes right off your name. So I'll give you one of these, and this is the only thing I think that's due on Monday. Shouldn't take you very long, but I hope you start to get acquainted and familiar with these chordal patterns. So this is what we're going to be using or dealing with for the next week. Sure, I can play that. I'll do that in a second. If you need to go, I understand that we're out of time, that's fine. I realize I neglected or failed to play the ascending fifth sequence variant, so I'm going to do that right now with the piano.